We'll go through, among other things, definitions. I know that's really boring, but the terminology associated with invasive plants has undergone some change. And we'll also look at the regulatory rules for invasive plants. And unfortunately, most plants that are invasive and are pests in your yard may not have gotten that much scrutiny. So I'm going to let Tim swap the slide again. And here is that terminology. So extension professionals from throughout the United States got together and tried to clarify this terminology because some of it was muddled. Don't worry, I'm not going to read everything on the screen to you. But I will point out that both native and non-native are specific to an area. So a plant could be native to Indian River County, but say not native to St. Lucie County, for instance. So that's geographically specific. You know, native to the United States, but not to Europe, and so on. Introduced means that a plant was brought here by humans, either intentionally or unintentionally. Some plants do hitchhike their way through a variety of means. That could be packing materials or even hitchhiking in on somebody's clothing or hair. We'll look more closely at the terms invasive and nuisance, and range change is pretty self-explanatory. So a plant is in a different place over time. So next slide, please. So invasive now means non-native, but to a specific area, of course. So non-native, introduced intentionally or unintentionally by humans, so it didn't fly in on a hurricane, and it causes environmental or economic harm. And we'll talk more about that as we continue to the next slide. So nuisance means that it's going to be causing some management issues, and this particularly would be for agriculture, so in pastures or in the production of food sources, and that could be a non-native or native species. So we'll go on to the next slide because I want to get through this part fast. So they'd like to ban these terms, the extension professionals, as a source of confusion. So don't be talking about non-indigenous. Reserve that for people, please. I guess foreign is a touchy issue these days. Alien, I guess we're going to reserve for Mars and Venus, and then we're going to get rid of invasive weed, invasive exotic, a term that I've used for years, and it's going to be hard to get out of my vocabulary, and a native invasive. It's a nuisance invasive. I'm sorry, it's a nuisance, non-native nuisance plant. So yeah, that makes me all tongue-tied. So we'll go on to the next slide, because I just wanted to get that out of our minds. So there is a federal noxious weed list. To get on the federal noxious weed list requires that a plant be a huge, huge problem. There are a few Florida plants that are native to Australia and some other places that have made it on the federal noxious weed list that's maintained through the United States Department of Agriculture. There's an awful lot of plants on that list that just do not thrive in Florida, and you will not find them here. Florida maintains a noxious weed list of its own. It is administered through the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and it takes an act of the legislature to get on that list. So people are always saying, well, why isn't Wooddelia on that list, and why isn't this or that plant on the list? It really does take a lot of effort and energy to get a plant on the list. And with invasive plants, some of them let me step back. Some plants, like lantana, are terrible problems here in Florida. But if you're a grower growing lantana to export for summer baskets in the northeastern United States, you do not want to see that plant on the Florida noxious weed list. because that prohibits the plant from production, legal production, in the state of Florida. So that's one of the reasons it's very hard to get plants on the list. While they may be really problemsome here in Florida, they have economic value to the large commercial horticulture industry that's part of our state. Then we've got the Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council, and they're planning on changing their name. And they are non-regulatory. It's a group of university professors and land managers who come together and have compiled a list of what they were calling exotic pest plants. We'll call them invasive plants. That list has been ever changing. They update their list every 2 years, and on their website you can see the 2019 list, as well as the lists that go back every 2 years. So they do change somewhat. And there'll be a 2021 list out sometime soon. So plants move around, they change their ranges, and as a consequence, what's on that list changes. Also may want to visit the Florida Invasive Species Partnership website, and the Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council is now going to be accessed through that website as well. So that also includes a lot of other organisms that are non-native and problematic, like pythons and lizards and all sorts of things that we don't want in Florida that come. Florida is an entry point for a lot of shipping traffic, air traffic, and of course people too. So, and given our large state with a variety of climates, so North Florida is much more temperate, South Florida is very tropical, we're where the tropics begin, in the middle of things. Florida can have a bigger range of invasive plants than many other places. Next slide. Maybe. So, the Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council, another mouthful, has 2 categories of plants. Category 1, the really, really bad ones, and Category 2. Category 1 plants have actually displaced native plants in the ecological landscape. They change the nature of the plant communities, and some hybridize with natives, and actually one native species of lantana is thought to have been extirpated. It no longer exists in Florida due to the genes of other lantana species coming to the state. Now, when you lose the native plants, you often lose the organisms that depend on them. So it's certainly birds and raccoons and other wildlife, but also some of the pollinators. And some pollinators have very intimate relationships with native plants and will fail to exist if the native plant on which they depend is eliminated by the expansion of invasive plants. So, and this does not look at the economic severity or geographic range. And then we'll go on to Category 2, and their definition tells us that they're not as bad as the Category 1, and I think the operative word is yet. A lot of plants that were on the Category 2 list have ended up, with the passage of time, being on the Category 1 list. And I hear tell that they have a secret watch list of plants that they think are going to become problems with the passage of time. Next slide. So, give or take $2 million, Florida spends $45 million a year of your tax money to control invasive plants. Agriculture estimates that they spend $1 million to control invasive plants in their croplands and in their pastures. And we can't really put a value on the loss of the biodiversity. And some of these invasive plants colonize hundreds of thousands of acres. They're not just a problem in your backyard. So, yay, it's the part I'm always interested in, the plants. So you may or may not be familiar with Kogan grass, but lots of people around the world are. This is regarded as one of the world's very, very worst weeds. And it is on both the federal and the Florida noxious weed list. So we're going to start with the plants that are in the brochure that are on both of these lists. So these are really, really bad guys. This is a perennial grass that grows from 1 to 4 feet tall. And undoubtedly you've seen it along I-95 and other roadways. It's even at 55 miles an hour, you can see the yellowish coloration, and it is almost always an absolute monoculture. One of its distinctive characteristics is the midrib, the vein down the very center of the blade of grass is off-center. There is another invasive plant, an invasive grass that has that feature, but who cares if you kill that one too. This one has, the fancy word is a scabrous leaf margin. It's sharp. You don't want to go walking through this in shorts because it's going to cut up your legs. And we'll see in a little bit the cottony long seed head that has lots and lots of windborne tiny seeds. Next slide. So for all the plants, I will show a range map, and that range map, which is on your right, is taken from the Florida Plant Atlas, a website maintained by the University of South Florida that is based on herbarium specimens. So you may see, I think that's Broward and Palm Beach County, showing there's no Kogan grass there. Nah, it's there. It just means nobody has sent in a voucher specimen for it yet. So this is a grass from Southeast Asia, and it's found in 73 countries and lots of crops. It is thought to have been introduced to the United States in 1911 in Mobile, Alabama, in orange packaging. And it really grew fast. So back then there was not an awareness of the problems that invasive plants could cause. So it was brought to Florida, and it was used for forage and soil stabilization. Now, I'm not quite sure why anybody thought it was a good forage, because after it got big, it was going to not be very palatable to the foraging animals' mouths. But there were huge acreages planted in Gainesville, Brooksville, and the Withlacoochee area. So this plant began its voyage in Florida in those areas and spread through the entire state. And it often gets spread by tractors and other equipment because the little seeds lodge in the tires. So sanitation is very, very important. And you can read for yourself that it's going to invade a variety of all sorts of habitats. And the word ruderal just means like a disturbed plant community. And you see lots and lots of it on the roadsides. So we'll go on to the next slide, and we'll talk about control. Now, much of this plant, more than 50% of the plant, probably more like 2/3 of the plant, is underground. Yeah, oh no is right. That is the right response. So I hate to say it, but hand pulling is really not that likely to be effective because of the extensive rhizomes. So you pull it up, you think you got it all, there's a tiny little bit left, and then you have more. Lots of people have applied herbicide at a pretty high rate, and everything has, scalded and been burned, and they thought, oh wow, we're done, that was easy. Well, not with the biomass below the ground. So you would kill the blades of grass, the herbicide would not translocate into the roots, and it would quickly reemerge. So we'll talk about that more in a moment. And yes, there is biocontrol research underway. Controlling invasive plants is always going to be something that requires integrated plant management or a variety of approaches. Cultural approaches, mechanical approaches. For instance, you can keep mowing this and keep it down and keep it from forming seeds. And then, of course, especially when there's tens of thousands of acres, you are in a natural area likely going to need to use an herbicide for control. And our best hope is for biocontrol agents. Those would be insects, in this case, that would come from Southeast Asia that would attack the plant. There have been, I'll call them biocontrol disasters in the past. The creation, or the research into biocontrol agents is highly controlled now. Involves millions of dollars and many years and lots of testing to ensure that the biocontrol agent isn't going to chew on something that everybody does not want it to chew on. So for Kogan grass, it is in research, and we're hoping that this will help with the thousands upon thousands of acres, much of it in ranch land and along roadsides, that is just a dense monoculture of Kogan grass. Next slide. So I did want to talk a little bit about herbicide. A lot of people were very loath to use herbicides. They are a pesticide. So anything that kills something, a pest, is known as a pesticide, and this is a plant killer. So if you're going to apply, you want to read the label and honor the label. The label is considered the law when it comes to herbicide use. And I want to just talk a little bit about the different kinds of herbicide use. I think most people are familiar with foliar herbicides, where a large amount of green material is sprayed. So I know that's been very controversial in Sebastian along the canals, where huge amounts of an herbicide that has been the U.S. government has said is safe and effective on water, on aquatic plants, is applied. The use, I think, in upland landscapes is a little bit different, although foliar is the approach that is going to have the most, perhaps, unintended consequences. You would never spray, for instance, on a day like this when it was windy, and you might get some non-target effects with foliar spray. Cut stump treatments, on the other hand, I think are a whole lot safer, and they're far more targeted. They
don't go food shopping. I'm turning the volume down here.
And then you would spray just the cambium.
I'm listening to, or I'm zooming with
or another invasive tree.
People.
You don't need to spray that whole big trunk.
On how to control Kogan grass.
Spray the part that's right under the bark, the cambium, that's the plumbing system that translocates materials. You need to do that as soon as possible. Do not wait 10 minutes. Try not to even wait at all, because once you cut it, and hopefully you've not cut it unevenly or jaggedly, there's a special pressure, it's called torpor pressure, and that's going to suck the herbicide right in to the roots of the plant and kill it. So a cut stump application is going to be very targeted and is going to involve a really small amount of an herbicide. Basil bark is often used on Brazilian pepper and some of the other invasive trees, and that involves spraying around the trunk of the tree. So the nice thing about it is you don't have to cut down that big tree and then figure out what to do with the rest of it. It will kill the tree in place. And if you have less trampling and dragging and disturbance, you're going to open up less avenues for other nuisance or invasive plants to colonize the area. So usually the amount you apply is based on the size of the tree. So a very large tree, you might treat maybe 2 feet of the bark, I'd say. A rough scale is about the diameter of the tree. If it's a small tree, just a little bit, and that can be applied with a pump-up sprayer, a spray bottle, And for somebody who's going to be careful, is not going to have a lot of likely non-target unintended impacts. Generally, the products that are available and used by homeowners are glyphosate and triclopyr. Glyphosate is Roundup. Roundup has gone off patent, so you can buy, I'll call it generic Roundup or glyphosate at a much reduced cost in garden centers and online. Triclopyr, amine, and ester go under the brand names of Garlon 3A for the amine and Garlon 4 for the ester. Those products are not that likely to be available in the average garden center, but if you go to Helena Chemical or some sort of an agricultural supply purveyor or online, you can get those products. Those also are available as generics. And you're probably saying, why is she belaboring this amine ester part? The amine means that it mixes with water. So you could use that for a cut stump treatment. The ester mixes with an oil. When we use that in our yard, we go to a place like Sam's and buy the very cheapest vegetable oil we can. You can mix it with diesel, but we know that's a carcinogen too. So some sort of an oil, you mix the triclopyr ester in, and then you treat. If you're treating a large area, you may want to add some dye stuff so you know where you did or didn't treat. I will say with the triclopyr ester, it's oily and you can see the oiliness. The oiliness is what helps it to penetrate through the bark. You don't have to girdle it, right through the bark into the tree. It will kill it in place. Usually on a Brazilian pepper tree, within 2 weeks, you're starting to see the leaves wilt, and then it's going to be within a month dead. Generally, depending on the area, 1 to 2 years before decomposers begin to break it down and then it falls down. So in a natural area, that's fine. You may find that somewhat unsightly in your yard. Yes, Tara?
Are you talking like how big of a spot, like you're there, I mean,
You've got to go, oh, I should have said it, thank you. You have to go all the way around the circumference.
Yeah.
So if you've got one of those Brazilian pepper that has multiple trunks, you have to do every single trunk. And so if it was 2 feet in diameter, I'd probably treat a 2-foot circumference on the tree as low to the ground as possible. None of these products are labeled for use in water. Now, if a plant is growing in an area that's seasonally inundated, you can treat when it's dry. These products are quickly taken up by the plant and translocated in the plant and then no longer available. Yes?
Yeah, I would like to add with the basal trunk treatment, I would probably paint it on instead of spraying it to avoid off-target plants, off-target drift of the herbicide.
And everybody has a different technique. You can, if you have a pump-up sprayer with a small nozzle, you can be pretty specific. Painting, I'm always worried about like spilling the container because I'm fussy. So yeah, it's another technique often used to put it in a container, use a paintbrush, and then paint it on the tree. You just need to be careful that you don't, because it'll kill other things if you get it on other things. Yes?
Aren't you worried about these toxic materials getting into the groundwater?
In most cases, I would be more worried about when things are applied foliar for aquatic plants than a basal bark treatment that's going to be translocated into the tree and is not likely to, or the plant, I shouldn't say, that's less, the likelihood of leaving the confines of the plant, if correctly applied, I am told by research scientists, is very minimal.
Because I'm saying this because I know that they discovered Roundup in the manatees in the lagoon.
Was applied in an aquatic setting to a grass that they ate. I think that's the, the more likely path for that. Yeah, and I don't apply foliar, because I'm not comfortable with that. Everybody has a different comfort level with these kind of products. And if at all possible in your yard, I'm gonna recommend hand pulling, for most things. Coving grass, you're not gonna get ahead of that hand pulling, but if you keep mowing endlessly, you have a good chance that plant's not, that's gonna flush, get mowed, and eventually you're going to take enough of the nutrients from the underground biomass that it's not going to be able to replace it. It's not going to be able to do sufficient photosynthesis to replenish the underground biomass. And in the yard where you can mow continuously, that's probably a really good technique. But for the 10,000 acres in the middle of a natural area, it's just not, unfortunately, possible. So there's a real risk-reward ratio that's different in different settings and for different people. All right, next, oh wait, last, and if you're looking for some good information, University of Florida, Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences has all sorts of publications on a whole variety of topics, from home ec to 4-H, to what you might like to plant in your yard, and to controlling invasive plants. And this is a good publication. It is intended for natural areas, but it has a lot of good information that would be helpful to homeowners. Some of the pests, the herbicides it refers to may require an applicator's license for use, for purchase and use. So next slide, which will be the next plant. And this one is a very, very evil plant. It's a vine, but it is also a fern. This is old world climbing fern, or Lygonia microphyllum. It's on both the federal and state noxious weed lists, and it can grow. One branch can grow to be 100 feet long. So, and one of the distinctive characters is that its central stem, or rachis, is a dark brown or black color, and it's very wiry. So you can't just pull it and break it off like most ferns could be, readily yanked down. It's got oblong compound leaflets, and then we'll see the fertile fronds that are the most concerning because they're the ones that have spores. Ferns are very, very primitive plants, and they reproduce via spores, so they're never ever going to flower. And this will engulf cabbage palms, slash pines. It can just smother other vegetation to death. There is a great deal of it growing along the St. Sebastian River. It hails from Africa and Southeast Asia. And the first time it was seen was in 1958, and a herbarium specimen was taken from an ornamental plant nursery in Delray Beach. It has escaped cultivation. It has spread into tree forests in the Everglades, and you'll see it along US 1, north of County Road 510 towards Sebastian, in extensive colonies. And next slide. So you can hand pull this. Most important is removing the fertile fronds, bagging that material, and disposing of it. And hopefully you can see in the picture, some of the fronds have kind of little frilly furls on the edges of the leaves. And that's where the spore cases, the sporangia, are held. And those are released by wind. So hurricanes will spread this plant far and wide, as will winds. So it's very, very difficult to control. The Friends of the St. Sebastian River have sponsored many a workday to try to control this plant. It is responsive to herbicide, and the recommendation is that they call it a poodle cut. You cut off the vines that are up into the canopy, and then you treat what's on the ground. There is some biocontrol research underway for this plant, and you might think, well, let's burn the fire-dependent communities where this plant is. But what they found, they found two things. One, that the vine would bring the fire up into the slash pines and kill them, and that pieces would break off of this vine and be carried by the winds associated with the fire to new locales. So very difficult to control and a great concern. I have seen it volunteer in potted plants. When I first saw it, I thought, oh, isn't this a pretty little thing? But then I figured out what it was, and it wasn't such a pretty little thing. So beauty is indeed in the eye of the beholder. So be careful if you see a vining fern show up in your plants. This punk tree, or melaleuca, as it's often referred to, is on the federal and Florida noxious weed list. And I'll say this is the plant that really started Florida's great concern with invasive pest plants. And so we don't see a whole lot of this around here anymore, because there have been some extensive control efforts that have been very effective for this tree. The photo on the right was taken at the Dodgertown property on 43rd Avenue in Vero Beach, and those trees subsequently have been removed. They do get out of scale with our Florida landscape, reaching up to 100 feet tall. Some people call them white bottle brush trees. They're in that same family and have white bottle brush type floral parts. They have alternate linear leaves that smell like camphor when crushed, and the fruit is a woody capsule that can hold from 200 to 300 seeds. So it's a huge seed producer, and that's a common characteristic of plants that become invasive. Next slide, it's from Australia. It was introduced because it is pretty as an ornamental in 1887, and it's got this spongy white bark that defoliates and is often that is actually attractive. But some wise fellow who decided that we should dry up those useless Everglades dispersed thousands upon thousands of seeds from airplanes over the Everglades. Because this is a tree that requires about 5 times more water than the average native plant. Clearly it was unsuccessful at drying up the Everglades, but it cost taxpayers probably over $1 billion to reduce the acreage. So this is one of the plants, the few invasive plants where populations are declining from about 500,000 acres in South Florida in 1994 to 1,000 acres in 1998. So this is continuing to decline in acreage in the state. Next slide. Hand pull seedlings. There are biocontrol agents that have been released that have done an okay job. They haven't been as stunningly successful as folks would have liked. And you cannot do a basal bark treatment on this because the spongy bark prevents the uptake of the herbicide. So you would actually have to girdle this. And there's a website there if you're looking for herbicide control techniques for this tree. Punk tree is another name for it. Next slide. Be on the lookout for shoe button ardisia. This is it's on the Florida noxious weed list, even though it's an ornamental. So it took many years of negotiation with the horticultural industry and land managers to get this plant to ban, because it is a pretty plant. You can see the new reddish growth the elliptical leaves, it is actually quite attractive. It has lavender star-shaped flowers in axillary clusters. That axillary cluster part's going to be important in a minute. And the fruit is a single-seeded, that's what a drupe means, fruit ripening from green to red to black. Next slide. We have a very similar plant called marlberry that's native. So when in doubt, don't pull it out. The shoe button ardesia, the flowers are going to be much, much larger, have a lavender tinge, and be star-shaped. They're going to come in the leaf angles or axils, so they can be over the entire plant. By contrast, marlberry only will have flowers at the end of the branches, the terminal end, and they're held in panicles, and they're tiny, and they're fragrant. And then next slide. The fruits are very, very different. So they will both be blue-black when ripe, but the shoe button or ardesia fruits go from green through stages of lavender. It actually is really pretty. I hate to say, marlberry, on the other hand, go green to like a maroon to black. And often the terminal panicles of fruits are so heavy on the marlberry trees that they hang down. So hopefully that helped. This is from Southeast Asia and India. It was introduced as an ornamental in 1900. It will often form absolute thickets in wet places. Yes?
Do birds eat both?
Yes?
Okay.
Yes.
I thought maybe that they only ate ours, but all right.
No. Birds are often an agent in distributing invasive plants because one bird is, generally speaking, as good as the other as far as their diet. So you'll see it's primarily a coastal plant, and it really does like moisture. Huge colonies along the St. Lucie River. And remember I said it likes water? I mean, it will grow in ditches in really, really wet places. Hand pull the seedlings, and generally speaking, there's going to be lots of seedlings because the seeds are very, very viable. You can use herbicide treatments on it. There's not biocontrol research for this plant yet. I'm not sure there will be because the distribution is more limited than some other plants that have a wider concern. But frequently you'll see just patches of seedlings. If you came here live, you saw the Australian pines along the Wabassa Causeway. These big behemoth trees that are really out of scale with our landscape. Yes, they hail from Australia. They are not an oak, they are not a pine either. They are very, very shallow rooted. The city of Sanibel had a Save the Australian Pine Tree because they were so beautiful along the entryway onto that barrier island. Well, after Hurricane Charlie, they all fell down and nobody wanted them anymore, so they were cut down and replaced with beautiful native plantings. Unfortunately, here on the Wabassa Causeway, when they were slated to be removed, citizens who found them beautiful and part of quote-unquote wild Florida lobbied to have them remain, and they are ever expanding along the Wabassa Causeway, and I hope they will not in future years be deterring access post-hurricane to the barrier island. They have a little woody fruit that people like to use for crafts and Christmas wreaths and things. There's multiple species. 2 species spread by seed. The Cunninghamii is suckering. Next slide. And so how did this get to be so prevalent in our part of the state? It was brought as a citrus windbreak. It grew fast and it deterred the wind around citrus groves. Citrus growers are experimenting now, the ones that we still have, with southern red cedar, and some eucalyptus trees to create windbreaks for that important agricultural industry. Beefwood, ironwood, she oak, and horsetail tree are some other names for what you do not want in your yard. Next slide. Handful any seedlings you find. Mechanical removal is expensive. They are heavy and beefy to remove. They're very susceptible to herbicide, but that if you have a big one next to your house, I'm not recommending that approach. And there are not biological controls available. It's not a great slide, but this was taken in Sebastian, and you can see a variegated Schefflera hedge at the bottom of the slide, and the plant growing out of the hedge is, next slide, a carrotwood tree. It's on the Florida noxious weed list, and this is one that even the nursery growers quickly were able to come to agreement with the land managers on. So it's got even pinnate leaves. The picture is from the Sebastian Stormwater Park. It grows up to be a substantially sized tree, grayish bark, clusters of small white flowers, and then the fruit is a hard capsule that some people find attractive because it's yellow and orange inside and has a tiny black seed. And next slide. It's from Australia. It was introduced in the 1960s. It was so invasive that it was banned from commerce and propagation in Florida in 1999. So this is the plant that started showing up on our spoil islands beneath the canopy of Australian pine and Brazilian pepper trees. It started in big tree islands in the Everglades. So just about anywhere you could think of, you could find carrotwood. It's called carrotwood because underneath the bark is a reddish color. And for those who are here, I pulled these seedlings up in a parking lot where I work. I didn't walk around. I stood in one place and yanked these up. You can see the reddish, shouldn't talk without my mask. You can see the reddish trunks, the reddish roots to them. And if you look carefully, some of them have the little black seeds still attached. Birds spread them, and the primary bird, because these are fairly, big seeds, or big fruits, I should say, are crows. They're like beloved by crows. Crows are smart birds. I really like crows. I'm not trying to slam crows, but they're a major disperser of carrotwood. If you live next to somebody with a carrotwood in your yard, you have carrotwood trees in your yard too. Handful seedlings. They are responsive to herbicides. No biocontrol agents are available right now. And fortunately, they are now prohibited from commerce. They're not especially cold hardy, and they don't hold up very well to wind. So nature is helping us with those trees. Air potato. This is, I hear the ooh-hiss. This is a vine, next slide, that can engulf other plants. And it doesn't have tendrils, but it'll just climb all over everything. It's got distinctive heart-shaped leaves, and it can grow to be 100 feet long. It does not flower in Florida with any frequency, but that does not mean that it has not consumed thousands of acres. It reproduces by aerial tubers, also known as bulbils. You might call them little potatoes, and there's a ball on the back table. About 100% of those bulbils that vary in size, from dime size to huge, will germinate. I always bring some in the house, and I used to actually put them out somewhere in the living room, but my husband got really tired of that, so they got banished to the laundry room, where there's no light and there's air conditioning. But a bulb still will sprout, and it will grow, and it'll grow fairly long. So next, oh wait, can you go back? I'm sorry, Terry. On the right, you may notice there's like a lacy appearance to the leaves. That's the handiwork of a very successful biocontrol agent, the air potato beetle. Next slide. From tropical Asia, it's thought to have come to Florida on ships associated with the slave trade. We know it was sent by the U.S. Department of Agriculture to an Orange County horticulturalist, and it invades disturbed areas, pinelands, hammocks, and people's yards. Next slide. You can collect the bulbils and then dispose of them in a landfill. Or you could if you didn't want to send them to the landfill, you could cover them with black plastic or put them in a black plastic trash bag, put them out in the sun, and they'll turn to slime. I found that out I'll call it the hard way when I left them on the black dashboard in my car. They are responsive to herbicide, but there's often a lot of non-target damage when they're herbicided. On the right, those are air potato bulbils that have sprouted that never made it out of the laundry room till the photo. And at each node, they'll start forming more little potatoes, a terrific amount of energy. But the air potato weevil or beetle, next slide, has been, I didn't put it in, yes, I didn't get that photo in. It looks like a little red ladybug. It's a very, very cute, charismatic insect. In many places, the air potato beetle has been so successful that the rearing program, after 5 years, has been discontinued by a lot of agencies. It used to be that you could contact your local county extension agent and get air potato beetles for release in your yard. The Florida Division of Plant Industry website says that they're going to do a limited distribution because that is the only entity rearing air potato beetles. So if you Google air potato beetle you want distribution, you can find out more information. But when I looked today, they didn't have any information available right now. So yay, a success with biological control in most places. And there's self-sustaining populations of this very attractive little beetle. You may be saying, well, why don't I see a lot of them flying about? Well, you're only going to find them around air potato. And air potato goes dormant during the wintertime, dies back to the ground. The weevil pupates in the soil during the wintertime, and the adults emerge about the same time that the vine begins to regrow. So yay, biocontrol that worked.
Where was that from, the air potato? Asia?
Asia.
Okay. And that's the same bug that keeps it under control in Asia?
Yes. So with biocontrol, what ends up happening is some lucky scientist takes a trip to Asia or wherever the invasive plant is from. Because for some reason, in its home range, it doesn't get out of hand. It doesn't consume acre upon acre. It is not in any way problematic. So researchers go and bring back insects, place them in quarantine, and then see if they can rear them successfully in the laboratory. And if they can rear sufficient numbers successfully, then they start seeing how well they consume the target plant. And if they seem to be effective at controlling the growth of the target plant, then they go on and test them on other plants that would be desirable. And it is a huge, long approval process through the United States Department of Agriculture. So, Brazilian pepper. I think we all know this plant, unfortunately. It grows into a small, I'll say a medium-sized tree, often multi-trunked and tangled, often has two margins, sometimes reddish midribs, male and females on separate plants. So you might have a male Brazilian pepper in your yard and it never produces fruit, but remember, it's part of the reproductive process and you might want to get rid of it too. And the fruit is a small red single-seeded berry. And next slide. From Brazil and in that area, 740,000 acres below Lake Okeechobee, and you can see from the range map, it now expands well past Lake Okeechobee. It's spread by birds, raccoons, and other wildlife, and invades a whole lot of different places. Seedlings, hand pull them. When they're ankle high, knee high, maybe even hip high, they're pretty easy to pluck up. Herbicides do work well on them. And last year, 2 insects were released on rangelands for biocontrol, and we hope that those are going to turn out to be as effective as the air potato beetle. Oh, people always say, but you can't get rid of the Brazilian pepper because it's so important for honeybees. Well, let's be honest, these are European honeybees. They're not our native solitary bees. But they do not produce a high quality honey. And there was a huge honey industry here in Florida before the Brazilian pepper tree arrived. And the folks who rely on Brazilian pepper just need to be a little more creative about moving their hives and finding other plants that support our native bees as well as European honeybees. Next. Rosary pea. A climbing vine, no tendrils, very pretty, pinnate, feathery foliage, sweet pea-like flowers, purplish in color. Most people miss the flowers, but it's the pods that everybody sees. So it looks like a round cluster, but there's flat pods, and inside each flat pod are 3 to 8 small red seeds that have a little black base. That's why some people call it crab's eye. These are very, very poisonous. 1 seed ingested by a child and chewed can kill a child. Now, anybody who grew up here is going to say, we spit them out of our pea shooters all the time and swallowed a few. As long as you don't break that hard seed coat, you're fine. So next slide. It's from India. The seeds are always the same size, so in days gone by, they were actually used as a unit of measure. It's now throughout the world. And there were seeds recovered from the Etosha shipwreck that germinated after being underwater for all those years. This is going to last a really long time in the weed seed bank. And next slide. It's got a deep taproot, so you're going to have to keep pulling the seedlings. You can do a herbicide application, and there is no biocontrol available. Oh, I hate this plant, and you see it for sale all the time. I see it, you see it in these really expensive upscale landscapes, and I'm thinking, you got corn squabble with that cheap stuff. It does have pretty purple flowers. It's not on any kind of prohibited list. They'll grow to be about 3 feet high. They're lanky, rangy, icky. Yeah, we get my point of view. And Jennifer's too. Linear leaves. Almost all the seeds are viable. They spit them out a great distance, and yeah, it attracts butterflies. Next slide. It's from Mexico. It's been around in the United States since 1933, and it is invading our natural areas. It's category 2 now, but this one is probably going to be category 1 sometime soon in terms of its impact on our natural areas. University of Florida does have some sterile cultivars that are available. They tend to be lower and less rangy in growth habit, and they come in white, pink, and purple if you have to have this plant in your yard. Lots of nice alternatives. Next slide. Do not plant, do not plant. The photo on the right is from Blue Botanical Garden in Orlando. It's planted a lot of places as a bad example. You can hand pull it. I actually will attest that a foliar application repeated will kill it. I killed it in my neighbor's yard with their permission. It had volunteered in their yard, they hadn't planted it. Next slide. Oh, Weedelia. Oh,
They sell that too,
they sell this too. I can't believe they sell this.
everywhere.
Yeah, it's got daisy-like flowers. My husband planted it years and years ago for stabilization. He thinks I've gotten rid of it in our yard. He doesn't look that hard. I went to the neighbor's yard to grab this piece of it. This is just a bad actor. Even the tiniest little bit will ruin it. Yeah, and why is it in the nursery trade? Well, it's cheap and easy, like the Ruellia, the Mexican bluebell or petunia. It's just really, really easy to propagate, as are many of our invasive plants. The leaves are, stems are somewhat succulent, the leaves are kind of scratchy, and it has attractive yellow daisy flowers. It's from Central and South America where it's not a problem, but it really gets out of hand here. It's probably in Florida by 1933, and it invades an awful lot of different places. It really goes nuts with water. It does fairly well in shade, but it'll grow in dry places too, and somebody calls it water zinnia or yellow dots. Next slide. So hand pull, hand pull, hand pull. I've been hand pulling for 20 years and I still keep finding it. You can mow it, and if you're gonna apply herbicide to it, I would mow first, let it flush with succulent growth, and then treat with herbicide. No biocontrol available. Should be prohibited, but is an unlikely candidate since people profit from it. And then Caesar weed. Caesar weed is a horrible thing. It is a great hitchhiker though. It will quickly grow to be 5, 6, 7 feet tall. It's woody. The leaves are, I'll call it a roundish shape. We'll see the dime-sized pink hibiscus flowers. And then it's got this little burr that sticks into your clothes, your hair, the dog, and hitchhikes along. Next slide.
Janice, can I just
Sure.
add a
Oh, yeah.
quick comment? I happened to look this up the other day because I was featuring it in the email that I sent a few days ago to remind about this meeting, and I learned something. I assume it's true. This guy does a website all about plants and stuff, and he said it was brought here in the late 1800s, I think it was, for the purpose of making
Cordage.
cordage out of it, and which they still do in Brazil apparently. And so that's the reason, that's how we got here anyway. So I was interested in hearing about that. But it is miserable, yeah, I'm forever pulling it that way.
And it turned out to be not economically viable to produce cordage in the United States from this plant, but it has escaped to many of our natural areas and our yards. And it invades lots of different places. Next slide, throughout the whole state of Florida. There's the flowers are about dime size. They're pretty. If you're pulling it, it's got the burrs on it, bag it, dispose of it in the landfill. Don't pick the burrs off in a natural area, leave them on, then take them off and dispose of them properly. I have tried leaving them on and then washing my clothes. No, they were still stuck to my clothes. Yeah, I'm lazy. Next slide. And don't wear that polo shirt material when you're going oh, Caesar weed. Thanks to Donna Sutherland for modeling. And then next to it, we have our one of our native ground orchids, and they're going to be quickly overtaken by the aeropatite. Right? Caesar weed next to them if somebody doesn't intervene and fuck it up. Next slide. Our puppy tried to help out at a Friends of St. Sebastian River Caesar weed pluck. She was actually eating the leaves. She's outgrown that. Next slide. And here it is along the Sebastian River. Caesar weed and the old word climbing fern. Often you don't find the invasive plants just singularly. They often grow together in places of disturbance. And we are at the last one. So this is a small woody tree, maybe to 7 feet tall. The leaves come in pairs and they're two sizes, so teeny leaves and bigger leaves in pairs, really distinctive for identification. The fruits are yellowish, orangish berries, and about 80% of the seeds are viable. Next slide. It's from Central America. It was cultivated as an ornamental here. I actually don't see this in garden centers. Yes, Terry?
Is there some other common plants that have a large leaf and a small leaf together, or is that pretty?
That's pretty
identified?
distinctive.
Okay,
Yeah.
unique to that.
Yes.
Around here. for the most
Around,
part.
exactly. All the right caveats.
Okay.
Birds spread it, and folks are always bringing this plant to me and saying, oh, it's so pretty, it came in my yard and I've propagated a bunch of it. And it's always bad to be the Debbie Downer that says, oh, put that in the landfill, please. And next slide. Hand pull the seedlings, and you can see the seedling, a big seedling on the right, and you can see lots of other little seedlings ready to be plucked up in the mulch. Some plants, like air potato and the 2-leaf or twin-leaf nightshade, really like mulch. Other things, mulch can be a mechanical deterrent. No biocontrol available, and that is the last plant.
They are, just quick annotation, they are very tough to pull, so if you got a shovel to loosen them up, that really helps.
Yeah, and there are a load of them along the St. Sebastian River in some moist areas, just complete thickets of nothing else.
A lot.
So once again, there is the website for the Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council. If you're not sure about a plant, the University of Florida has an assessment of non-native plants. So you can put in the name of the plant, and then you can find a research-based assessment of if the plant is going to be invasive in our part of the state. So it brings the state up into North, Central, and South Florida. Because some plants like Nandina heavenly bamboo that barely can make it in this part of the state are a terrible pest in the panhandle in the northern part of the state. So the assessment gives you regionally specific information about plants that you might find in the garden center and be wondering if they were likely to be future invasive plant problems. The
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, go back one. The Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants is another University of Florida site that has a lot of good information about the identification and the control of invasive plants. And next slide. Do it now. Don't leave it in your yard. It's only gonna get worse. That's my last, and then thank you. Websites for the sponsoring organizations, and if anybody doesn't catch me at the end of the meeting or is zooming in and wants to send me a question, they can. Any questions here? Yes?
Yeah, is this presentation going to be available to look at it again?
We will make that happen, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
We do have one question online too from chat, and if anybody who's online and wants to ask a question, use your chat feature. And the question is, moringa plants are being grown in Sarasota, is it invasive?
Yes. If you go to the University of Florida plant assessment, their assessment is do not plant.
What is it, Kalinga?
Moringa, it's a tree, it's a fast-growing tree, it's often touted as a great fast-growing food source tree. But University of Florida's recommendation is do not plant.
Any other questions from online? I do not show anybody submitting any chats.
Well, thank you.
All right, well, very good.
Thank you.
Thanks to Janice for helping us out.
Always glad
I will tell you that I brought a couple extra copies of our newsletter from this month. This is our current issue. We did have an article here about invasive species, and there's also a feature article from Janice about Rosary Key.
Yep.
So you're welcome to take those. If you're interested, this is also available online on our website. And I see Janice, you passed out the plan brochure already.
Yes, I did. If you want to get on the email list for the Eugenia Chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society, there's a sign-up sheet on the back. Right now, we're going to be meeting outside mode. We even did that in non-COVID times, so that we see what folks do in their landscapes and great ideas of native plants that could replace some of these invasive plants. Our next meeting, actually we have 2 activities in April. One is a native plant ID contest in a Central Beach yard that is just a beautiful example of how natives can be used in the landscape. And on the Sunday the 25th,
Yes.
we were negotiating time earlier at 11 a.m. We will be visiting Terry Green's yard. It's a small yard, but he has packed in a lot of beautiful native diversity, and it's a great inspiration. So get on the email list to find out more.
And just one last thing, anybody is interested in information about us, more information about us, there's some brochures there. And want to take a 5-10 minute break, and then maybe like at the bottom of the ramp down here, is that a good place to start by the entrance?
By the entry pavilion?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. And for those of you joining us online, thanks for joining us. We will be making this presentation available from sources. However you found out about the meeting, we'll have a link at those same locations for the recording of this meeting, so you'll be able to access it later. So for now, we'll sign off from the indoor portion, and we'll head outside.